Welcome everyone to our webinar series, Leadership Taking It to the Next Level. I'm Susan Chapman, Director of Member Services for the Tri-Societies. With me is Ann Jorce, Vice President of ASTA and representing ASTA's Management Skills and FUSE committees. We're pleased to have you on the fifth in our new webinar series titled Leadership Taking It to the Next Level. This series is designed to provide you with useful information and insights into the management and administration roles you may currently be in or are moving towards. The series is a collaboration between ASA, CSSA, SSSA, and ASTA. There's just a few notes before we begin. You're welcome to ask questions via the chat box on the lower right of your screen. There are two options for posting the question or comment: to all audience members or just to the organizer. So be sure to select either option from the drop-down in the chat section. To keep the flow of the webinar, we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. After the webinar, you'll receive a feedback survey. Please take a few minutes to give us your thoughts. This is our inaugural webinar series, so all feedback is welcome and will help us build the program. And one final note, please stay tuned to the end of this webinar where we'll be talking about our last and final in this series on June 11th. It will be a unique blend of in-person and online webinar experience. And now I'll turn it over to Jonathan Shaver of Envision Partners, who will be our moderator.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jonathan Shaver from Envision Partners, a leadership development company focused on advancing the career and impact of high potential leaders in our agricultural industry. I'm an associate member of the American Seed Trade Association and a member of the Management Skills Committee. The American Seed Trade Association works on behalf of the seed industry to promote the research, development, and movement of quality seed to meet the world's demand for food, feed, fiber, and fuel. Today's webinar is Getting Better Feedback. We're very fortunate to have as our speaker today, Carl Johnson from Syngenta. Carl is a senior leader of talent management and organizational development for Syngenta, a global company with 28,000 employees. He heads talent management programs and strategies, including onboarding, integrated performance, management and development, succession planning, retention, and diversity and inclusion. He also provides practice leadership of organization development strategies and initiatives, including business transformations, M&A, and organizational design. Prior to Syngenta, Carl spent 15 years working with senior leaders to tap the full potential in themselves, their teams, and their organizations. Primary areas of focus were top team effectiveness, strategic alignment, business transformation, organizational design, and cultural change. He has worked with board members, CEOs, and senior leaders across numerous industries, countries, and cultures. Carl currently lives in Stillwater, Minnesota. His two sons are at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, leaving Carl and his wife, Edwina, with even greater freedom to explore their passion for art, food, and travel. As you can tell, we have a great deal to learn from Carl today. So prepare yourself, listen, capture your thoughts and questions, and we'll save plenty of time at the end for comments and to hear you out with those questions. And along the way, he may have a few questions for you. Carl, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thanks, Susan. Thanks to everybody who's dialed in. Looks like we've got about 60 folks on the line, and so we're looking forward to dropping into some Q&A with you guys, probably in about 20 or 30 minutes. So we'd really like to kind of move through the presentation. I'll share with you some stories and some insights. We'll do some polling, but we will open up quite a bit of time to do some Q&A. And as I'm sure you've experienced on these webinars, often the greatest insights and the best kind of learning happens then. So with that, we'll start here with a quick poll. And the question really is, how good do you think you are at assessing your own performance? And so Susan will push that out to you all, and Jonathan will give us a read on what those results look like here, just to get us up and running.
Great question, Carl. Yeah, and they're answering fast. About half still with us. All right, so we've got some good numbers here. I'll give everybody a chance to realize that all of a sudden they've been asked a question in the very first slide. With about 75% of the people in, we have 13% at excellent, 44% at good, 38% at fair, and 4% at poor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty good. We got a good bell curve there, actually. So most people are weighing in at around good to fair. So the reason I asked this question is, when we're talking about feedback, well, why do we ask for feedback? And there's some really pretty compelling research in this area. So I've got a couple bar charts here. And on the left-hand side, the vertical is really how accurate are people at predicting overall effectiveness. And the left bar, the blue one, is how effective individuals are on gauging their own effectiveness. And the red bar is really around how accurate are others at gauging our effectiveness. And so just the human condition, part of getting through life, if you really kind of take it back to the savannas of Africa, so some of the things that have kept us alive as a species are just a prevailing sense of optimism. And so what that means, though, is that when we get to really gauging ourselves, we tend to give ourselves better grades than we're actually really deserve. And actually, other people are quite complimentary too. But there is a gap. So you tend to get a better insight, better feedback from others than you're going to give to yourself. So that's just the basic kind of underlying theme that we're seeing here. And I mean, you guys are pretty reasonable. You're giving yourselves goods and fares in that domain. And I think that kind of weighs pretty well against this chart. There weren't a whole lot of excellence. And I would challenge you, if you did answer in that domain, to step out, start getting some feedback, and then come back and think about that. This is also, I found this really quite interesting, similar study. We're talking about a study that was done with over 16,000 leaders. So in the world of research, that's highly validated data, and so this is really meaningful. So over on the right, you've got a really strong bar chart. It says top 10%. So if you look at this group of 16,000 leaders, those who were gauged as being in the top 90% effective as leaders were also the top 10% in terms of the amount of feedback that they asked for. And you can see, I mean, it's almost a perfect slope here. So if you're not asking for feedback, there's the danger of ending up in the bottom 10% of leaders in organizations. And the more feedback you ask for, it tends to be an indication that you're on the right path in terms of improvement, your leadership effectiveness. And this is a pool of leaders. This is actually true of individual performers as well. So I just pulled this one study. There's a lot of research, and this is similar, regardless of where you are in the organization. So feedback's important, both in terms of getting an accurate picture of what you're doing well, what you could do better, and in terms of fostering your own growth and increasing your effectiveness, which is, at the end of the day, I think is really the most important kind of metric that people are looking at when they're evaluating within your respective organizations. So let's talk about different parties you can go to get feedback. And so I want to set up this paradigm. We'll use this throughout the next few slides here, so let's make sure we get it right. So third party, you can go to third parties for feedback. So who are third parties? How we define them? That's somebody who really has no skin in the game. So it's nice because they're outside of what's happening to you directly. There's no impact to them on whether you succeed or fail. With that becomes a degree of objectivity, and so who could they be? They could be a leader in another department. It might be somebody external to the organization. Could be a supplier or a customer in some respects that sits outside of your company, who maybe still sees you a bit, has some visibility into what you're doing, but again, is a couple steps removed. You got to be careful in that customer domain. In many instances, that might not be true. And could be somebody that you know has just had a similar experience, has been through this before. This could be somebody who's more senior, has lived and breathed and succeeded in other organizations, and you're going for them to get some guidance on overall, how they've managed their career. Could be somebody who, just went through, I don't know, an integration of two companies and survived that and thrived in that setting, and that's something you're facing, and you want to get some feedback on how they did that. Somebody who, had to move geographically and settle their family somewhere else, and you've got that ahead of you, and you want to see how it was done well and what they learned from that type of thing. Second party, somebody who's a little closer, really does see you in action, maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but really kind of knows you, has some sort of impact in terms of your deliverables, how well you perform, and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but not directly. And then could be somebody you're sitting on a cross-functional team with them. It's a peer, but they're doing something very different than you. So they see you in team meetings, they see you in other, day-to-day, see your interactions with your boss, with your direct reports, with other people in the organization, can give you some insight, but they're really not in the flow of your work in your work stream. And then first party is somebody who's really down in the trenches with you, directly impacted by you in your role. Could be a boss, a peer, direct reports, somebody who's providing inputs to your work or needs the output to your work. So we'll talk a little bit about how to approach these three different types of people who can give you feedback, what to expect, and how to set that up, and in what areas you may be more appropriate to ask them for feedback on. So let's start with a third party. And here's my experience. So I want to tell you a little bit of story. I used to work a couple jobs ago. I was working within the University of Minnesota, and I bumped into this fellow, Chris, who was the top development officer. So it's Chris's job to go out and talk to people with deep pockets, generally alumni of the university, and ask them to contribute to the future of the university, whether it's contribute to a building or to fund a professorship or things like that. And so Chris said to me at some point, he said, "You know what, Carl, I used to ask for money and I got advice. Now I ask for advice and I get money." And I just found it to be kind of a humorous little tale, close enough related to what we're talking about, because people love to provide advice. And so if there's anything holding you back from reaching out to folks who maybe are outside your inner circle to ask for advice, just discard any fears that you have around that. Because generally, particularly in this third-party realm, it's very easy to reach out and grab time with people to just get a little bit of advice. And so what I'd say is free yourself up and start doing that. We'll talk a little bit about what topics are best for third-party individuals and how you might want to use folks in that domain. Now, we've got another quick poll here, and there's a set of 4 questions here. So what I want you to do is think about these, read them, think about them here for just a second, and respond and give us an idea of which question you think would be most effective for getting feedback after you just got off a team phone call.
All right. Give everybody a chance to read this and process a little bit. You can change your answer too. Looks like 2 and 3 are running neck and neck as we go along here.
Are they?
Yeah, but we'll.
Have I got the same order as you guys on the poll?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just make sure here.
Yeah, just read it.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go ahead and we've got 11%. Could you give me some feedback on the call we were just on? 49%. What did the team need from me on that? What more did the team need from me on that call? 35%. Did everyone get what they needed from that phone call? And 5%, could you give me some feedback on how I did on the call?
Wow, you guys have been doing something right in these webinars, because 49% of the people are spot on.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about why. Why is that the best answer? And let me just share a couple stories here and talk about feedback. So first of all, don't ever ask for feedback. Nobody likes to give feedback. And honestly, it's really not about you. So if you look at the way that these questions are positioned here, you know, it's really, a lot of this is around turning the discussion around to what others need from you and where the gap is. And it makes it a much easier conversation. If you walked up to somebody and said, can you give me feedback on X that I just did, that becomes a personal and somehow kind of social threatening type of conversation. They may not feel comfortable and trusted and in the right kind of relationship with you to give you really authentic feedback for fear of hurting your feelings. And, you know, I'll tell you, here in Minnesota, it's a Minnesota nice culture. People are really not comfortable giving direct feedback in that manner. But if you start asking about what people need, in particular people beyond yourself, folks lean in. They really, really appreciate that sort of phrasing. So what I'd advise you to do is start thinking about questions you can ask about that. And if we look at that glass down there, you know, there was a time in my career about a year and a half where I was doing a lot of executive coaching, and I learned this. I learned to work with people and say, look, you know, this 360-degree feedback that you're getting, it's not really about you. It's about what people need. And so if you've got low scores in a particular domain, you know, don't get upset about it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just know your team and the people that you've asked for this feedback, that's a gap. They're telling you what they need. They're not telling you you're a bad or a poor person in this domain. They're just saying, hey, step up and give me more of this because I need it. So the intent of this glass half full thing is, look, there may be instances where what you're given isn't totally what people need. And you can use this kind of language to turn the conversation around, get them in telling you what they need, what the team needs, what the organization needs in their language in a way that's very non-threatening, because they're not talking about you anymore. You're actually taking this conversation, setting it on a table, talking about what a team or one of your direct reports or someone else needs, and then they can give you some really authentic feedback on that. And don't call it feedback. So, you know, I'm worried I might not be giving you everything you need to succeed. What do you need more of from me? You know, that's, you know, if you're in an intimate relationship with a direct report or something like that, that's a way to get the direct feedback without calling it that. What are some things you think the team needs from me to succeed? Which of these things do I need to do more of? You know, you might have a list, 2 or 3 concerns you've got. You know, what do you think I really need to do more of for the team? What does the team need me to do more of? Not, hey, give me some feedback. Am I falling short on this? That's not going to get you the feedback that you need in most instances. Do you think my peers have some expectations of me I might not be meeting? Things they need me to do more. Those are ways to turn the conversation around, make it safe for them, and allow you to actually get the feedback that you need. So, you know, what's the right setting? We'll talk about this. I just got a couple pictures here. Is it a coffee talk, or are you going to sit down for 30 minutes over coffee and kind of dig in on something? Or did you just walk out of the meeting, turn to your colleague and go, hey, can you give me a little feedback on, you know, what the people on the call really needed and whether I and the team met that expectation? I literally just had this happen yesterday. I was on a call with one of our very senior leaders, Jeff Rowe. He's the global head of our seeds business. We had an hour-long dialogue with people throughout the organization. We'd set up this dialogue, and he turned to me at the end of the meeting, as I've seen him do in others, and said, okay, can you give me some perception of how that went? You know, so here's a guy who's succeeded, you know, is one step from the CEO in our company, and I've observed him at least in 2 or 3 different instances at the end of an interaction, asking for feedback in a non-threatening way around what people on the call needed. And so, you know, really good leaders do this. It becomes a part of what they do. And it's just kind of a rhythm of how they check and balance and make sure that they're showing up in the ways that make them highly effective. So, sources for feedback. Let's talk a little bit about what's the right setting. So is it the hallway talk? Is it a coffee talk? Third party. this is could be a 30-minute phone call, a quick coffee break. Mentorship is a really kind of, people talk about it a lot, and it rarely happens really effectively, frankly. And it is very hard to step into a mentor relationship or look for a mentor and get them engaged and included in many ways. So what I encourage people is, and sometimes that feels like, trying to get married after the first date. So don't set these things up that way. You need to make it easy for people. You're asking for advice. Hey, could I grab you for 15 minutes? Could we set up just a time for 30 minutes to talk? I have a couple things I want to check with you. I could really use your advice. And one of the things, again, there's research behind this, is there's a gender thing here. It's if you're asking for feedback, in particular, it can be very hard for women to set up these, and for men, senior male leaders, to kind of weigh in this way. So one of the things you want to think about is coffee breaks are safe. One of the things that has happened over the last 40 years as we've got more gender balance in the workplace is, ethical, good senior leaders, they're not gonna go out for a beer with a female colleague. So you need to be safe. If you're asking to go out, make it a coffee break, make it public, make it safe for both of you, because you got to worry about and just guard yourself around perceptions either way, and make it easy and effective for these things to set up. So just take a little care in how you set them up. Second party, look, these can be, you just walked out of a meeting, you got this person who's on this cross-functional team along with you. Can you just give me some real-time feedback? How'd that go? Could be like the Jeff Rowe example I just used. You can do these more impromptu. I'm always like, do it clean, do it quick. If you can do it real time, you're going to get unfiltered feedback. If you set these things up ahead of time with people you work with all the time, they're going to overthink the feedback that they give you. It puts more responsibility and onus on them and some work that they've got to do, and you're just going to get better, more insightful and kind of targeted feedback if you're doing it on a regular basis and doing it quick. First party, it kind of depends on them. If you have a real formal boss who's reflective and wants to think about things, give them time to do that. Say, hey, could we grab 30 minutes next week? Here's a couple things I want to talk about. Send an email, here, I'd like to check this with you, get some advice from you. If that's how they roll. Meet their style, though. If they're a quick burst person, do it that way. You're going to have to kind of flex to make it easy for them. So, just some basic guidance here, but it's always good to be reminded. Those who get feedback and get it often are approachable. So you're going to need to initiate. You've got to own your own growth, your own development, and that means either really or just metaphorically, you're the one who's got to put out your hand first and make eye contact first, and just establish and set this up as something that you need. Initiate and be open. Ask the first question. I've got a challenge, and I'm wondering if you could give me some advice. How do you think that meeting just went? Anything you think that they need that I didn't give them? That type of staging is really, really important. It's both specific but also kind of broad enough for folks to take the conversation where they want to go, or for them to just say, hey, great insight, let's loop back in 2 hours because I'm running to my next meeting. You're giving them a lot of openings to either download with you or not, or set it up for something else. And when they're giving feedback, it's very important that that you show up as someone who's absorbing that and really taking it to heart. So you're going to have to listen without interrupting, ask clarifying questions when there's a pause, and restate what the other said to signal understanding. And you might actually get another level of clarity by restating back to them and say, okay, well, what I thought you heard was that you'd actually like me to be more directive, you're a little concerned that I'm not sticking up enough for the needs of our department, and you need some air cover from what Betty said in that meeting, and you want me to actually, provide you that in that public setting, not just here, as we're talking about it afterwards. And nod, take notes, all of these sort of physical things. If you're in person and you're real time, people are going to be looking at your behavior. And if you're on the phone, it's even more important to do these things like restating, asking a question here or there, throwing in a that's interesting, or some sort of signal that you're tracking with what they're telling you. And what type of feedback are you looking for, and do you want to use third party, second party, first party for that? So there are all different areas of feedback that I want you to consider asking for. Could be this really kind of 30,000 foot stuff up on the upper left, strategic skills. Man, I've never really understand how this part of the department or this part of the organization connects with mine. How the business drives profitability, this sort of 30,000 foot view stuff. That might be a really good third party conversation. Hi, I could really use your advice on understanding the way that Syngenta works. Could I grab 30 minutes of your time to talk about the production and supply group? Because over here in commercial, I'm not sure I really understand how our groups connect and how we drive value and deliver that for the customer, or XYZ, operating skills, getting a little closer into it, might be somebody internal. Courage, that could be a lot of things. Could be like, wow, you got a really challenging conversation coming up and you want to get some feedback from your boss, or could be third party, could be somebody who's older, more senior, kind of seasoned, wise, has managed to succeed, and it's kind of like, hey, I got this challenging call coming up. I could really use a perspective. Maybe you could give me an example of when you were in a similar situation. Could we grab 30 minutes down in the coffee room or in the lunchroom to discuss this next Tuesday? Bottom line, organizational positioning, this organizational savvy thing, lots of, that could be first, second, or third party. Personal skills, probably somebody who's a little closer, first or second party, who sees you in action and can give you some direct feedback on that. And then trouble with people, again, could be specifics. Wow, I've got a real challenge working with Betty. I know you work with her a lot. You seem to be succeeding. Could you give me some advice on what's working for you? Does she like a one-page synopsis, or does she need more detail? Could you help me with this? That type of thing. So here's the thing, though. Once you ask for feedback, you've got a couple choices here. You can face reality, or you can ramp up your delusions. So once you open this conversation, be ready, because you're going to get some advice, you're going to get some feedback. So be prepared to go to number one. Don't go to number two, because that doesn't help anybody, right? So in terms of feedback, look, if you're going to ask for advice, be prepared to act on it. You actually have a responsibility once you ask for advice. You're bringing somebody into a conversation with you. You're asking for their input. If you're just going to discard that, that doesn't work for anybody, and actually may be damaging your relationship with that person. But the other thing is, when you go out and you ask for advice, people will observe your behaviors, and you know what? They're now on your team. They've leaned in, they've given you advice, and if they see a stumble, that's not always a bad thing. Making the effort gets points. So they are now vested in your success because they provided you some advice. So also be prepared, because they might come back and give you some more unsolicited advice, but at least you set up this channel of feedback to get that. And who knows, they may pick you up. So that's been a lot in a little time. And Jonathan, why don't I hand it over to you to get us started here?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carl. That was really jam-packed. My notebooks are full of great information here, as I've also been watching the questions come in. So participants, now is your opportunity. What piqued your interest in Carl's comments? What situation are you thinking about that you'd like to get some more insight on? This is a really great opportunity. And all those questions are coming in, Carl. I'll just make an observation and see if this is right. Many of your examples and stories were pretty informal. You have a few minutes, you have 5 minutes. What do you think? Catch after a meeting. Would you agree that getting feedback informally might be easier or even better than more of a formal situation?
I absolutely agree. It's a great insight, Jonathan. And the reason is because it makes it less work for the other person. When you're in these informal modes, unless they're a very formal person, right? So we had one example where I was talking about, if your boss is very formal or you've got somebody who kind of rolls that way, roll with them. But for the most part, you want to make this easy for people. And so if you take it in snippets, you'll get more feedback, you'll get it more often, and if it's closer to real time, it's going to be more accurate. So it's really about, again, it's not about you. It's about them. It's about what they need, and it's how you can close the gap with that. So if you make it easy for them, that's why I sort of disparage the mentorship type of thing. It can really, really work. And if you have a more formal relationship like that, where someone has agreed over time that they're going to mentor you, that's wonderful. And not everybody's up for that, and so make it easy for them.
Right. So I've really heard that theme. Then it's about them. Make it easy for them. Ask them what they need. That's really, and so that might tie into the very first question that came in. It said, I've heard that 360s are not very useful. That they measure what is important to the rater and not to the person being rated. So,
well, yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great, and it goes right to my point. So actually 360s are incredibly useful, and they're a different type of feedback than we're talking about. So 360s are very effective because they're anonymous. So in every instance of if you're using a well-designed and it's delivered appropriately 360, you don't know who gave you feedback. So most 360s, you will be able to see your manager's scores. But if you got peers and direct reports, they bundle those up, which makes it safe. So the good thing about 360s is that they can give you really, really precise feedback. It can be really accurate, and they can be really useful from that perspective. Now, that said, like any type of assessment, they can be they're a snapshot in time, So there could be something that just happened that affects the ratings. You could have somebody who's really disgruntled, not just with you and the organization, that skews your scores. So are they the end-all be-all? No. Every assessment has limitations, but it's really actually quite different than what we're talking about, because what we're talking about in this feedback session is actually getting one-on-one input from somebody where you know who they are, they know who you are. And that's why we're trying to create this safe, quick, easy for them type of environment, and talking about not asking for feedback, but asking for advice about what others need.
Okay, great. Yeah, so 360s are a different kind of feedback, have a different purpose, and the anonymity as well is really what makes it stand apart from this kind of advice or personal feedback.
That's correct.
So a little bit of a comment here. It said, it's not about me. That's so true. But the feedback is about me, particularly when it's negative feedback. And so I'm going to read into this question a little bit. So the participant, you'll forgive me for that, is when it's negative, it really feels like it's me. So how do I respond?
Yeah, it's a natural human reaction. I mean, we're all that way, and so in particular, if you have that kind of emotional response, because I mean, you can actually feel it, right? I mean, we are physically, we tighten up, our blood pressure goes up, face might get a little hot, and I think it's in particular good to be able to process that stuff over time. So if you feel yourself getting that way, it is going to be important for you to be able to turn it around and say, okay, not necessarily, it is about you and it isn't. It's also about them and what the team needs. So, I mean, what's the closest example I can say is, I've been married 24 years, and there was an important moment, probably good for our marriage, where I understood that, my wife's given me some direct feedback here. And you know what? She's actually telling me what she needs. It is very hard to separate that from, telling me how I'm deficient in a personal relationship like that. I'm not disparaging my wife. I mean, it's this natural part of the human condition, and not like she provides that feedback any more than any other wife or spouse. So there's this thing about if you can turn that around with yourself internally and say, okay, wow, I'm getting really defensive. I'm starting to get reactive. Can I take a deep breath? Can I try to get my body to relax a little bit? And can I just listen to what they're saying? And then you don't have to unbundle it all. You don't have to deeply understand it. You just need to listen, process it, and it can be really good to just thank them. The easiest thing to thank you for that. I'm going to think about that. It's found a profound impact. I'm feeling myself getting agitated, and it's upsetting to hear. And why is that? Because you care. At the end of the day, some of the agitation you might feel and the hardness of hearing it, it's actually a good thing because you care. If they gave you that feedback and it just bounced off you and you didn't care, that's a dynamic that you actually don't want, right? So, just kind of leave it there. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Finding gratitude in negative feedback, that you care. That's a very positive. So we'll just kind of build on that. If you take the time, let's assume you take the time, you have thought through what was said, and you disagree. So that's one of the questions here is, what if you don't agree with the feedback? And I might add into that, particularly in light of the 2 points you said at the end about what to do with that feedback.
Yeah, so here's what I'd suggest. Go test that with somebody else. So if it's a situation, generally, if you're getting that type of feedback and you don't agree, it's not going to be something from a third party, right? It's going to be your second or first party situation. So go test it. Get some more data points. I mean, it's, maybe they are wrong. Maybe, in fact, this is somewhere where you could help them with their development if it's coming from a direct report or a peer. So if you don't agree with it, I would not encourage you to disagree with it in real time. I would encourage you to take that kind of open stance, receive the feedback, thank them for it, then come back and go, okay, well, who else can I ask to see if that's how they see this is the case or not? And do your research before you come back and refute that with somebody. So.
And what would it sound like to refute that? How would you start that kind of conversation? Well,
I mean, it really depends. Is that beneficial to anybody for you to refute it? If it's, there's instances where you just take the feedback, you own it, you kind of live with it, you go test it. No, they're wrong. I don't know. Is there a requisite follow through with that person? There might not be. If there is, you can always come back and go, you know what, you told me this, I tested it with 2 or 3 other people, and they just don't see that. You're not going to disclose who those people are. You got to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we get a little bit further? I mean, you could ask those other people for advice. Oh, well, what are some questions that I would ask Jim to get clearer? Maybe he's seeing things a little bit differently than you. How would you could ask for input about that? Wow, that's really different input that I got from Jim. How would you approach him now that I've heard from 2 or other people? How do you, there's a lot going on there, and And who knows, maybe Jim just stated it the wrong way or in a way that's not clear, it was hard for you to understand. So I think if you look around yourself and your organization, there's just a ton of people there who are ready, willing, and able to help you.
Mm. All right, right. So go out there and get a second opinion if you don't agree or if it's
probably,
clear.
Yeah, probably two or at least a couple other opinions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So those are a selection of broader questions. I've got quite a few here that are kind of specific about sitting in on that situation, that you're having a conversation, you've asked somebody for advice, and they start rambling about something that's not relevant because they're talking about themselves versus me, or not relevant to the question that I asked about. How do I bring people on point? What kind of language might I use?
Yeah, I think, it's as you open up these dialogues, it might be a two-way street. You might be giving them some advice as well. If that's a person who regularly does that and always brings it back to themselves, might not be a best source of feedback for you. You might not consider them in this sort of inner circle or circle of friends that you're kind of reaching out to for feedback. I think it's really easy to say, hey, I've really heard this restating thing is really good. Hey, I know you're talking about this and that. Can we bring it back to here's where I really need some help. It's on this. I mean, you just bring it back to here's where I really need advice. Here's where I could really use your help. And do that 2 or 3 times. If you're not getting it, it's time to shut that conversation down and go to somebody else for feedback.
Sorry, I would suggest, Carl, and maybe that people actually appreciate it when they get off topic and you bring them back and say and refocus the conversation about what it is you need. Again, because people want to help. They genuinely want to help. And so they'll feel better when you leave having answered your question.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right. Well, here's another one. What if somebody gives you feedback you didn't ask for?
I mean, is that really a bad thing? I mean, it depends on how it's delivered, right? So
okay.
What's so interesting, like, we've the title of this webinar has feedback in it, and it's like when I hear that question, it's like, what's feedback mean? And it sounds like it's kind of really kind of tough, unsolicited, maybe off the mark, and you can get feedback from people that you didn't ask for, that maybe is delivered in the moment and really isn't on target, right? So it's something about managing that relationship. I mean, if they give you feedback, unfortunately, you do have a responsibility to listen. And again, I'd sort of put it to this test of, is it worthwhile feedback? Do you now have a responsibility? You have a responsibility to listen. If it's given to you unsolicited, do you actually have a responsibility to act upon it? That's one question to ask yourself. Do you think it's on target? Is it off target? Is it emotional and in the moment and really about a project that went wrong or an angry customer or something that's not actually your responsibility? And like we just said, I don't know, maybe you need to go out and test that with a couple other people. If it was unsolicited feedback, it's go out and do the research. So get a couple more sources of input. Who knows? Maybe it's a huge blind spot you've got, and you didn't know you had it, and there's whole organization's looking at you going, really, you don't know this? So test it, and consider the source. You haven't selected them for the feedback, so is it someone that you trust? Is it that it's accurate? But just do a little due diligence on it.
So this is another case that of not responding in the moment, that like with negative feedback, don't respond live right then and there. Even if somebody's giving you feedback at an inappropriate time, it might be right, that they that you don't respond right away. Take it.
Yeah. I think, unless you're in crisis mode, and if this is an Apollo 13 situation, you got to get around the moon and come back, you're gonna dive right in, right? But if you have that opportunity, people love to know that they've been listened to, and sometimes just by listening to them, you disengage a lot of energy and negative energy, just by the fact that you're listening, you're hearing their input. You're being an active listener. A lot of times you don't really need to commit to anything real time. You just need to listen for that person to walk away and go, okay, I got that off my chest. I gave the feedback. And then if you can come back in a constructive way and go, you know what, I really listened to what you said. I tested it with a couple other people. Even if you're coming back and saying, essentially, I think you're off the mark, they know that you cared enough to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that level of clarity, that you internalized it, and a lot of times they're on your team. Metaphorically, if you do that, you start to get them onto your team.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that might be that third choice of I thought about what you had to say, and I got some I looked to try to validate that or understand it, and I'd like to just talk about it more because I found that I don't necessarily agree with your suggestion.
Yeah, or it could be if it's a tense moment, you're getting that unsolicited feedback. Maybe you don't need to test it. Maybe you're just like a day or two later, like, hey, I'd love to pick up where we left off. I had a couple more questions that came to mind that would really help me to kind of understand where you're coming from. Blah blah blah, and get clarity on it. Make sure you heard right. Let them know they were listened to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's a different audience. Somebody asked about examples of how to ask clients for feedback. So clients or customers.
Yeah.
Where would they fit in that third, second, first category, and what might that look like?
Well, I think clients it's really interesting, right? So you're, I don't know, I've been in sales positions in the past, and sometimes we're having conversation with clients. We've got deliverables. We know, our service needs to be timely, accurate. The product's got to get there. There's these sort of tangible things, but it's not bad with the client to sort of sit back and go, hey, look, could we sort of take this out of the day-to-day, and could you just give me some advice, because I'm working with you and other customers like you, are the things you see where I'm just not giving you what you need, or where my team isn't, or and you can get into really interesting conversations because sometimes these are organizational constraints over which you have no control, but it's good to know that. It creates, again, when you ask for advice, people lean in. So what better reaction from a client? Now, our customer. Now, if you've got somebody who's not as mature, if they're treating you like a vendor, and you know what that feels like, you might not want to have that. If you're truly a partner, if you're in this together, if their success is meaningful to you and your success is meaningful to them, that's a good relationship, and you want to move into that kind of trusted advisor status, and you can ask those kinds of questions, and it actually deepens relationship and gets you closer to your customers. And you'll hear a couple things by asking the questions in a particular way around what they need, things that you feel, that they feel you might be able to do differently or better or spend more time on versus less time over here, can be really helpful, and really set you up for success. I mean, in ag, I mean, these are often very long-term relationships that span generations, right? So tends to be a level of intimacy and relationship and trust you need to have. So I'd encourage you, if you feel that, to go ahead and ask those questions. And it also takes it, it's nice for them to give you feedback as an individual versus feedback about how, in my instance here at Syngenta, how's Syngenta doing? That's different than how am I doing? How is my team delivering? What more do you need from us to succeed?
Okay. Right. In the case of clients or customers, it truly is about them. How can I be better serving you? How can I create products that you're more likely to buy?
And it can also be like the example I just gave earlier with Jeff Rowe at the end of a meeting. It's like, was there more that you needed from that meeting? How did we do with that? How can we do this better for you? That type of thing. Doesn't have to be big, huge spanning things. Could just be like, are you getting what you need out of these meetings? That we set up quarterly or monthly or daily or weekly. That type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's another useful in the moment question. Is there a good way to prompt people to give more critical feedback? I ask for that kind of feedback or advice, and people just say, "You're doing a great job. Everything is great." It isn't very helpful. It's the comment.
Yeah, I think don't ask for critical feedback, because then they get defensive and worrisome. If they're telling you that you're doing great, it is just because they're being a little lazy, but also maybe a little afraid of hurting your feelings. And so if you get real specific around if you perceive gaps or you're worried about things, get more specific. If you ask for very vaguely, can you give me some authentic, can you give me some crucial, can you give me some critical feedback? It's those polling questions we went through. It's find a particular instance, a particular domain that you want to get feedback on, and ask them what they need more of relative to that. So the more specific you are in the question, actually the harder it is for them to kind of wiggle out of that. And then just go for those real quick instances. Often if you catch people off guard, you get really candid feedback. If you do grab them right after the meeting on the walking through the hallway after, or you're on a virtual meeting and you call them like 5 minutes later, it's like, hey, in that meeting, there was that particular thing where Joe and I were talking about X, Y, and Z, and I don't know, is there something more he needed from me where I could have done that better? Can you just give me like 30 seconds of input on that, how you might have handled it or how you've seen it handled better? Get to that degree of specificity and go for these kind of micro events. You're going to get continuous feedback that's actually much more spot on, and actually you're training people to give it to you. So the first couple times, if they kind of wallow around a little bit, they'll actually. My next meeting with Jeff Rowe, I'm going to be prepared to answer that question at the end of it, because I know he asks that question after every meeting. If I've got a colleague that does that, I'm going to be a little bit on my toes and be, okay, I might get a call from Carl. They're thinking, because I've seen him do that before.
Right. So repeat it. Just ask it again, and people will eventually realize that you really do want something specific. You really do want to improve. So one of the things you've talked about is popping in to senior leaders, stopping in their office, catching them in the hall after a meeting, and so on. And there's a couple in here asking, how realistic is it that senior leaders have the time to give that?
You're not asking. Yeah. So here's the main thing: you're not asking for a lot of time. And the other thing is, senior leaders they're not different animals than us. So they're people too. And a lot of times people put distance between themselves and senior leaders, and senior leaders are starved for this. If you think about somebody who's really, I was doing some work with a CEO, and he said, it's one of the strangest positions I've ever had. Everything gets done through others, and it's hard for me to get feedback because I'm one step removed, and it's a little bit lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Senior leaders are humans too. They have daughters, they have sons, they have relationships, they have things going on in their lives. They're human, and like everybody, I'm telling you, they love to give advice. I mean, I was in a coaching conversation with somebody who was within the snowmobile company near here, and I told him, just reach out to your CEO and ask for 15 times, ask his exec admin for 15 minutes on his calendar, and I bet you get it. And he did. So don't ask for an hour. If you can do it in 15 minutes, do it in 15. If you can do it in 30, do it in 30. It's much better to ask for 15 minutes and have a 45-minute conversation. So again, make it easy for them. They're much more accessible than you think they are. And like anybody, they got peak times of travel, and they've got times when they're not doing that. So it maybe you don't get on the calendar for a month, but that's okay. Just strive to get that 15 minutes.
Okay, there you go. So that's great advice, is that they're more available and they want to speak to you more than you think that they do. And I think that's just a confidence piece, right? It's just stepping in and speaking to the senior leader for the first time. And after you do it once, I imagine it's easier.
It is, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, Carl, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I'm going to actually put all our participants on the spot as we close up. You've just given us a webinar. Would you like any input? And how would you ask for that feedback? And we're going to ask the participants to put it in the question box or the chat box, wherever you'd like to put it.
Yep. So here's what I'd say is we like to use a paradigm, just a model of good, difficult, and different. So I would love feedback. What was good? What was difficult? And what would you do differently in terms of this webinar to make it a better experience for you? So you're telling me what you need, okay? So what worked? What was maybe a little difficult? And what would you do differently with webinars like this going forward, and this one in particular? If you gave us that feedback, that'd be awesome.
All right. So I'm asking everybody to go ahead and put that information in there, and it'll get captured in our recording. I won't have time to summarize it, I don't think, but I'll read a few of them out here for us, Carl, as it starts to roll in. Okay. And I want to suggest, because there are not a lot of them coming in, that being willing to give advice or feedback is a very good practice for receiving it. So I hope that you'll take that time. All right, so here are a few. There we go. Good, the number of slides was great, not too much information. Good, slide content, simple and effective. Messages were simple, easily digestible, relatable. Different. We didn't hear much about giving positive versus improvement or negative feedback approaches. Okay, so negative versus positive. Makes it sound easy to get started with a conversation. And that's what I needed. Difficult, a discussion on the generational gaps in approaching others. To be addressed on the next webinar. They added that in there too. We'll plug that. All right, so great, that's wonderful. So if we'll advance to that last slide, let's go ahead. And
hey, can I just model what we do here,
please.
which is thank you for that feedback. That's really fantastic. That's really helpful. We'll think about how to address the gender gap. I really appreciate that input. And this piece around positive improvement versus negative, totally hear that, and we'll work on doing that better. and appreciate the feedback on the slide content. Glad that was the right size and fit for you guys to be effective. Thank you.
Yeah, and there are lots and lots of comments now, Carl, so we'll capture all of those for all of our use. And so I too appreciate that feedback. Very good. Thank you very much, Carl. We really appreciate it. So I want to thank the participants for your interest and active participation in this webinar. Carl, if you'll jump to the next slide for us. I now want to make a special announcement about our next and final webinar in the ASTA Tri-Societies Leadership Series. The next webinar is Leading Across Generations, led by Wayne Gale from Stoke Seeds, Andrew Lauer from American Seed Trade Association, and Elizabeth Stuhlberg from the Science and Policy of the Organization of the Tri-Societies. This webinar will be live streamed from Washington, D.C. at the American Seed Trade Association Policy and Leadership Forum. And that webinar will be held on June 11th at 3 o'clock Central Standard Time, 4 o'clock Eastern. So until then, I want to say thank you to everyone, and we will see you in a month.